Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Unworthy Ministries. I'm Robert, the most unworthy person on the planet that should be talking to you about anything to do with God. But I sure am glad God chose me and I didn't choose Him. Because if it would have been up to me, I'd be out there doing my own thing. God has broken me, humbled me, and made me love the Bible. And hopefully that you can get something from our devotional today. It's from the book of Jonah. And I want you to see how God is the God of second chances, and third and fourth and fifth and so on, because God's faithfulness and His divine call on our lives doesn't go away simply because we wander and go astray. I'm just going to go verse by verse and a little bit of an exposition style today, and hopefully we can gain some insight on this wonderful story. And remember, I know that a lot of you have probably heard, the story of Jonah and the whale, right? Well, not everybody grew up in church, and not everybody might be familiar with the impact and the lessons that we can gain from these stories. So please just pray that God will humble you and open up your heart and mind to receive a word that either you can encourage yourself or maybe encourage someone that you might know. We're in the book of Jonah, chapter 1, verse 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and crowd against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. So Nineveh was the capital or the main hub of the Assyrian Empire during that time. Very, very ruthless people. Very, very, very cruel. Okay, I've heard some of the history books say that whenever they would raid or conquer, they would kill the livestock, they'd kill the children, they'd kill the women, they'd kill everybody and wipe everybody out. They were a ruthless, ruthless people. And you see right here that God basically sees their wickedness, and He sees the horrible impact that the Assyrians are having on the world and his own people, the Hebrew people. And basically He has called His prophet Jonah, the person who was called by God, who was set apart by God to deliver the message. And basically He is saying, go to Nineveh, that horrible city, and tell them, look, stop this, stop the way that you're living, stop the way that you're treating people. Verse 3, But Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So Jonah had to have, in his mind wondered why God would send him to the heathen people, why He would even give them a shot, why He would even give them a chance. Why wouldn't He just wipe them out like something like Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Why would He send His own prophet into the danger zone, to tell them to stop their ways? Well, it's amazing to think about is that Jonah was not only probably scared because he knew exactly who was in Nineveh and what kind of people they were, but also he was probably a little confused and angry because, these people didn't deserve mercy. These people didn't deserve a chance. These people were slaughtering people left and right. So why in the world would God send His own child somewhere where He knew that he probably wouldn't be accepted? They'd probably murder him. They'd probably ridicule him, and they didn't deserve it anyway. So Jonah fled. He got out of there. He went the opposite way. Some of the textbooks and the studies I've read, Tarshish was actually the opposite direction, literally 180 degrees from where he was supposed to go. It's incredible. And he got out of there because he figured, I'm not going to go risk my life to do that. God will choose somebody else, right? But the Lord sent out a great wind on the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship was about to be broken up. Notice that it says, but the Lord sent out a great wind on the sea, okay? The storm didn't just arise from just out of the blue by some random chance, okay? God is sovereign. He's in control of everything, right? So God sent out a storm to make sure that that boat wasn't going to make it to where Jonah thought he wanted to go, right? So basically, instead of God choosing somebody else, instead of God saying, you know what, I'm just going to choose somebody who will obey and I'll just let Jonah just go somewhere else. Nope. He tracked him down. He chased him down. And how beautiful is that? And how relevant is that to us and our own souls and our own salvation, of how God doesn't just let us run around in the yard like a wild dog and destroy ourselves. We might have our season of disobedience. We might have our season of sin. But God's going to come for his children, and God's going to come for his people. And this is exactly what he does here with Jonah. But the Lord sent out a great wind on the sea, and it was a pretty strong storm, because, they were afraid that the ship was going to break in half, that they were going to just wreck right there. So the storm had to be pretty serious. Then the mariners, which were sailors, were afraid. This is verse 5. And every man cried out to his God, and threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten the load. But Jonah had gone down into the lowest parts of the ship, and lay down and was fast asleep. So you have all these different men from all these different countries and cultures and religions and stuff, and they're crying out to the water god and the sun god and whatever deity or whatever they could do there, because they were in a position where they saw that this was serious and they were about to die, and they were trying to cry out to their God and do whatever they could. But here's Jonah down there sulking and hiding on the bottom of the ship. It doesn't say he's hiding, but I kind of think he's down there pouting, or kind of feeling sorry for himself, or whatever the case. But he was down in the bottom of the ship asleep during the storm. So the captain, gets verse 6, so the captain came to him and said to him, "What do you mean, sleeper? Arise, call on your God. Perhaps your God will consider us, so that we may not perish." At this point, they're desperate. They don't care what God you call on. They don't care what it looks like. They just want to be saved. All right, they've already thrown the cargo over the ship. They've already done everything they could, and now they're turning to whatever God or deity that they can. Verse 7. And they said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots, so that we may know for whose cause this trouble has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Right, so they're trying to find the scapegoat. They're trying to find the guilty party, right? They're trying to find out whose fault this is. What God out there is cursing us because we've got the wrong one on our boat, right? Well, there's a verse in Psalms, I can't remember exactly what the verse is now, but basically it talks about how God's sovereignty and control is over even a roll of dice. Nothing happens in chance. God's not 98% powerful. He's 100% powerful. He's 100% sovereign. So God made sure the lots fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, "Please tell us, for whose cause is this trouble upon us? What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? And what are your people?" They're like, "Man, who are you? Like, what do you do? What have you done? Where are you from that would make this happen to us and make the lot cast and land on you, and looks like all the fingers are pointing to you?" Then he said to them, "I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." So here Jonah basically tells them who he is and who his God is. And in verse 10, then the men were exceedingly afraid. Now they got really scared, because they saw that, this guy's God is the one that's doing this to us, and he's on this boat with us. It was confirmed. And the men were exceedingly afraid, and said to him, "Why have you done this?" For the men knew that he fled for the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Jonah spilled the beans about how he was running from his God and how he was supposed to go somewhere, and basically was telling them where he had messed up. Then they said to him, "What shall we do to you, so that the sea may be calm for us?" For the sea was growing more tempestuous. So it was getting worse. It was starting to probably bend and creak and break, and they were moments away. These were experienced sailors. They were experienced mariners who did this for a living, and these people were going across. It was a means of travel in that day and time. And if they were getting that scared and that worried, it had to be a pretty severe storm, like a flight attendant on a flight. If you start seeing a flight attendant get scared and worried, you better be praying, because something's not right? In verse 12, he said to them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea. Then the sea will become more calm for you, for I know that this great tempest is because of me." Well, Jonah now sees where he went wrong, and he sees that that's his fault, so he might as well die, right? Well, he was feeling sorry for himself, and now he sees where he went wrong, and he sees what's going on, and he tells them to just throw him overboard. Nevertheless, verse 13, the men rowed hard to return to land, but they could not, for the sea continued to grow more tempestuous against them. Therefore they cried out to the Lord and said, We pray, O Lord, please do not let us perish for this man's life, and do not charge us with innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So the men tried and tried to row and go a different way and make it work, but God's plan blocked that. God is sovereign in the things that we pray for, and He is sovereign in the things that get blocked, right? Just as many prayers that are answered of ours, there are just as many blocked ones, and we better be thankful for that, because God's plan was that He would be cast into the sea and eaten by a fish, right? Well, they were trying to row back to land, but it didn't work. God said nope, made sure the storm was severe enough for them to have no other option to cry out to His God and to do what we see in verse 15. So they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. So Jonah's overboard, and look at verse 16. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly and offered a sacrifice to the Lord and took vows. So God, through this disobedience of Jonah, through this unfortunate circumstance of the storm and putting these men at risk, God used this example, God used this situation to be a witness of His name and His power to these men who were crying out to all kinds of gods before that. And now they're crying out to the God, right? To God Himself. And they even took vows. I mean, they're saying that they're going to serve God from now on. And He used that, I believe, as a situation to show His power and let His name be known to these men in this situation with Jonah. Now the Lord had prepared a great fish. Notice that in verse 17 it doesn't say whale. Now we think it probably was a whale, but it doesn't say that. The word that they use for fish in the Hebrew is just fish. It's not any type of whale or certain sea creature, but it is a large fish, great fish. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Chapter 2. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the fish's belly, and he said, I cried out to the Lord because of my affliction, and He answered me. Why did he cry out to God? What was the reason? What was the aggravating circumstance that made Jonah, his heart and his mind, turn to God? I cried out because of my affliction, because he was in the belly of a whale, or the belly of a fish. He cried out because he was suffering. He cried out because he was guilty. He cried out because he was afflicted. God used that circumstance to allow his heart to turn back to Him. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me, and your billows and your waves passed over me. Then I said, I have been cast out of your sight, yet I will look again to your holy temple. The waters surrounded me even to my soul. The deep closed around me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. I went down to the moorings of the mountains. The earth with its bars closed behind me forever. Yet you have brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer went up to you into your holy temple. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord. Right? He wasn't praying and remembering the Lord whenever he was asleep down into the boat and life was going as he thought it was. He was getting away from this calling to go to Nineveh, and he was running off to wherever, right? It was whenever he was faced with trouble. It was whenever he was on his last leg, as you would say, and whenever he was in the belly of the fish, whenever he was suffering and his soul was fainting, that's when he said, well, I better cry out to God. How like that? How like us? Whenever we are in a situation where a family member's sick or having financial trouble or something serious happens and we're backed into a corner, we like to cry out to God, oh God, please save me, right? Oh, please help me in this situation, right? And many times He answers us and He's there for us, right? But then when things get back going the same, we don't really desire Him as much. We don't really seek his name. We don't seek his face. We don't cry out to him. We don't ask him to forgive us of our sins. We don't ask him to show us our hidden faults. We don't try to grow and learn more when everything's going our way, right? But then again, when we need him, we cry out to him kind of as a last resort. Well, this example of Jonah shows that even though that this is true with him and all of us, God is still bigger than that. God is still loving and still compassionate. And he knew the whole time that Jonah was going to do this, and he knew that, but he still had mercy on him. He still saved him from drowning. He still had a plan for his life. He still approved of him to do what he had originally called him to do. He didn't choose somebody else because he made himself unworthy, right? He didn't, just because his track record was not very good, he didn't choose somebody else to do it. And that's amazing that God forgives us, and he set Jonah's heart right and mind right, and he disciplined him as a son, and he taught him the right way to go. Verse 9, but I will sacrifice to you with a voice of thanksgiving. I will pay what I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. Verse 10, so the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. So here's Jonah right back where he started, right? And in chapter 3, notice how it starts off a lot like chapter 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and preach to it the message that I tell you. So here's God giving Jonah a second chance, right? All right, Jonah, here we go. Arise, go to Nineveh, just like I told you before. And what did he do in verse 3? So Jonah arose and went. He went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, a 3-day journey in extent. And Jonah began to enter the city on the first day's walk. That's motivation. Whenever we're disciplined and shown where we went wrong and what we should do, and we're given a second chance, we are motivated. We are ready to do it, right? And he got to Nineveh ready to get it done because he learned his lesson. God disciplined him with love as he would a child. He wasn't cruel to him, but he taught him a lesson. So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh. In verse 4, and Jonah began to enter the city on the first day's walk. Then he cried out and said, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown. Now, most people would think that the people would just cut his head off or something by then, right? But the people of Nineveh believed God, proclaimed a fast, and put on sackcloth from the greatest to the least of them. Wow. God knew all along that his word wouldn't return void. He knew all along that he was going to curb their appetite for conquering, that he was going to alleviate their bloodthirsty ways and at least kind of be a block to that for a while, or maybe make it a little bit more desirable in the area. The word, in verse 6, the word came to the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne and laid aside his robe, covered himself in sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he caused it to be proclaimed and published throughout Nineveh by the decree of the king and the nobles, saying, neither man nor beast, herd nor flock taste anything. Do not let them eat or drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth and cry mightily to God. Yes, let everyone turn from his evil way and his violence of his hands. Who can tell if God will turn and relent and turn away from his fierce anger so that we may not perish? So God saw their works, that they turned away from their evil ways, and God relented from the disaster that he had said that he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. Wow. So we see that God's plan all along was going to be successful. God was going to be with him. God was going to tell him what to say. God was going to soften their hearts. And Jonah was just the vessel, right? He was the mouthpiece. He was going to be the one that was actually going to deliver the message, right? Well, if Jonah, to begin with, would have just said, I don't agree with this, I don't understand this, but I'm just going to walk by faith and not by sight, okay? I'm going to go and I'm going to do what I said. It would have been a lot easier. It would have been a whole lot more simple. He made it really difficult, but he learned some things the hard way, like I have, and like all of us have, right, that have a relationship with God. It doesn't matter how far we wander. It doesn't matter what we do. Because if God has called us to do something, If God has set us apart and wants us to be a godly father or mother, if He wants us to be a godly friend, if He wants us to preach, if He wants us to be a missionary, if He wants us to just witness to people at the gas pump, right? He's going to set our heart right. He's going to set our heart to Himself. And He's going to shape us and mold us to be who we need to be, despite how stubborn we are, despite how much we wander. I hope you've seen today that God is a God of second chances. God didn't choose somebody else. He told Jonah to do the original thing that he had said, because God is faithful to His call. He's faithful through His word, and He's faithful through His Son, Jesus Christ. God bless you.